Cool.
Hey guys, it's Devin here with Make Anything, and I've got another really cool VR sketch for you guys today. I made this epic scene of David versus Goliath, but my Goliath is a little different than the old tale. It's this crazy beast that I came up with, so today I'm going to show you guys the process I went through of making that. I actually did a little bit of planning on paper before going into VR, which is unusual for me, but this is probably the most complex thing I've done so far in Gravity Sketch, so I have to make sure that everything will work out and print correctly. And really, the main thing that I have to be aware of are my overhangs. So as always with 3D printing on an FDM machine, if you don't want to have to use supports, you have to make sure that none of the parts print too steep. So my printer can handle about as low as a 30-degree overhang, but 45 degrees really is the ideal, so overall I want my model not to get much more steep than 45 degrees at any part. With a creature like this, it's very difficult because the legs have to come together at some point, but my trick was to make it come almost to a point right at the stomach. It does round over a little bit, but if it's a small enough section doing a steep overhang, that's okay. We just gotta make sure that these arms and legs generally don't get too steep. I can have this arm reaching out and the other arm bent. Doesn't really matter. Just gotta watch those overhangs. This was a pretty sloppy sketch by my standards, but I was kind of just messing around, doing a little bit of ideation, kind of just figuring out what I was gonna do. I want the head to be looking up, that way I don't have to deal with a chin or anything, because that's another area where it's very difficult not to have overhangs. But this monster is just looking straight up, and it's got an almost squid-like mouth that has all these tentacles shooting straight up. So as long as things are growing upwards, they should print. So let's actually go into Gravity Sketch and see what I'm doing. So here it is. You guys are familiar with this layout if you've watched my other VR sculpting videos. Basically, I'm going to start with a flat plane and then use this weird diamond-shaped tool to start roughing out my model. So I'll start with just a very thin skeleton of what I want to draw, and then I'll add thickness as I go on. I just want to make sure, like I said, that those angles are correct. So here I'm just being aware of how steep I'm getting and drawing the feet in. And I'm just going to keep doing a bunch of really quick strokes. And Gravity Sketch, when I first started using it, it was in closed beta, but now it's actually available to the public. It's still not the full-fledged, complete version of the software, but they are constantly adding new features. For example, they've now got this pressure-sensitive brush. So based on how far I press the trigger on my HTC Vive controller, I can make a shape thinner or thicker without having to change the size manually. I just do that with the trigger. So it's pretty interesting. I decided to test that out, and that makes it a little easier to fill in large spaces but also get some small details without having to scale the brush or zoom in and out just as much as I had to before. Alright, I'm going to start working on the head now, making those tentacles and bringing them straight up. There's another option for the brushes called speed lines, where the brush thickness depends on how fast you're going. And that's kind of nice for getting tapering lines like I'm doing here with these mouth tentacles. So as you can see, I kind of speed up my stroke as I'm drawing so that they start thicker at the bottom and then thin out towards the top. Although, since I am 3D printing, I have to make sure they don't come all the way to a tiny point. So it does take a few tries to get the thicknesses right. This thing is really weird, guys. I'm sorry if it's creeping you out. It's kind of like a land shrimp monster thing. My brain does weird things. Alright, and just for fun, I'm going to color in the eyes with a white brush. When I'm 3D printing this on my own printer, the colors obviously aren't going to come through on the actual print, but it helps me kind of separate my details while I'm drawing it here in VR. This head looks a little low down to me. I kind of did that just to avoid the overhangs. I didn't want the neck to be too long. but I can adjust it and kind of grab big chunks of my sketch at once and move them. It's a very cool thing you can do with Gravity Sketch. And that allows me to kind of elongate the neck a little bit more. And then I'm going to start adding to the body, and basically I'm just fleshing everything out by now. Adding a nice little tail there. You can also change the proportions of the brushes to get these interesting shapes, but I decided not to do that. I'm going to stick with the idea I kind of sketched out, which were these rectangular tubes kind of shooting out from the back. It reminds me of this cicada I saw in Japan that was being eaten by a parasite. Had all these crazy strands sticking out of its back. Super creepy stuff. Maybe that's why I end up thinking of things like this. This is my creature, so I can do whatever I want. Give it squid mouth, give it goat ears and snake eyes, whatever. Doesn't matter. Speaking of the eyes, I'm going to use this diamond brush to kind of create an interesting diamond shape. It's an interesting shape for the eyes. Kind of like a goat. Have you ever seen goat eyes? They're square. Super weird. Alright, continuing on here. Adding more details, more upward growing tubes. I love these things because you can 3D print upwards pretty easily. They are going to be very fragile depending on the size of this print, but they look cool and, you know, I can do it. I'm going to use that pressure sensitive brush again to add teeth inside of this monster's tentacle mouth, and so I'm able to kind of get pointy teeth by starting with a light press and pulling the trigger down further as I draw each tooth. Now let's make this mouth a little more intimidating by adding these giant arms. You know, squids have those two long arms, and these are going to kind of split like a snake tongue. I'm telling you, this is a hybrid of a lot of different animals. Alright, my screen capture kind of messed up at this moment, so I'll just jump ahead to my end result. I did a little extra work on the ground, and I added some surrounding environment, as well as a little tiny David who's fighting this giant beast. Look at that little guy with his stick of doom. He's hopeless. Alright, let's see this thing printed out. So here are the early layers. It was pretty tough to get this base to lay down. It's a pretty large base, and to have the PLA not shrink and peel off the build plate can be tough sometimes. And the legs build up individually. You know, they don't actually come together until the body starts printing. So they're really fragile, and it was really scary printing this out and being worried about the leg breaking off, because that's definitely happened to a few of my prints. Here it is, almost complete and looking awesome. And if you watch the nozzle here, you can almost see the layers being put down. And that's how it's gonna work, one layer at a time. Alright, let's check out the time lapse. And here is the completed print. So I'll just break it off the build plate, and then I actually run it under a heat gun, which will get rid of those little strings you saw. You can see those little arms blowing about under the heat gun. They're really thin, so I had to be careful not to melt them. I did a little bit of scraping with an X-Acto blade as well to really clean things up, and here is the final result. I thought I'd share this other VR sculpture I did. I call it Grow, and it's kind of inspired by coral and attempting to combine geometric and organic shapes again. With this one you can better see the way the heat gun melts away those little strands, so thought I'd show it. And also, if you look just near the bottom of the screen here, you can see how the layers actually shifted. And that was my printer screwing up, but luckily it still managed to actually finish the print. And it looks really cool. Wow, you made it all the way to the end. Very impressive. Few people do that. Thanks so much for watching my video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and check out all the other things on my YouTube channel. I've got some really cool 3D printed stuff and more VR stuff coming up too. I'm Devin, this is Make Anything. Don't forget to stay inspired.